Hi, this is Dr. Scott Young, and today we're going to do the eighth of our Tribulation series. This is called The Last Weeks on Planet Earth. Now, before we get started up, I want to share with you a couple things. These are, and I've mentioned to this before, this is called The Wedding of Jesus. This is on drscottyoung.com, so you can kind of see this. This does talk about some of the groups that we are actually going to deal with today. The sheep, the goats, and the bride of Christ. Very relevant to especially these last two episodes. So a lot of people don't understand that because the reality is when we look at the New Testament specifically, but even the Old Testament at the same kind of time when we talk about prophetic issues, one of the arguments is when is Jesus coming back? How is he going to do it? So you got the when in the house, right? But guess what? The Bible really doesn't answer those two. I mean, it's kind of like, when you were driving to, the aunt's house or the grandma's house and you're a kid and you're sitting in the back of the car and you ask your parents how long is it going to be until we get there, and they tell you the annoying statement. I remember how annoyed I was. No, you did the same thing when I had a kid. The annoying statement was soon or a few hours or something like that. It's a really non-specific number, right? And you're going, why can't you tell me the real thing? Well, there's a lot of reasons for that, but the biggest thing that I want you to focus on, stop asking the questions that God doesn't even want you to know about. And then you go, that's what I want to know. Sorry, that's not what he's asking you to know about. What he's really trying to tell you is the who and the why. The who is all over the New Testament and Old Testament. Remnant, sheep, goats, children, bride, faithful, chosen, called. I mean, all these, it even uses saints of God. I mean, there's so many who questions that can actually be answered. It's like thinking about your audience. Now, for instance, this is not relevant to this one, but here, the voices of the 144,000, which is really the first half of the tribulation, is a fictional book, right? And the first thing that any good publisher should ask a writer is, who is that book made for? Is it a children's book? Is it an adult book? But is it, they want to know and really define who that is written for. The New Testament and the Old Testament are really about that question, and most people are spending time talking about it. Like, you have non-believers, not or atheists, right, and using the Bible, and I'm going, well, half the time you use it out of context. You'd be just as ticked off if I used, your textbook, which I've had tons of professors use their own textbook, right? And if I use your textbook out of context, you're like, well, that's not what I said. Well, duh, that's the same problem we're having when we talk about the New Testament. So that's a perspective I want you to kind of realize as we go through this last section. Okay? So that's my little preparatory point. Let's do the intro time. So that was a big old long, nasty introduction part. Sorry, didn't mean to do that, but we'll skip right through a couple this first screen here. Okay, so I'm going to do three different timelines just to give you a help. Now, you can screenshot this if you want to and just kind of go back to it. But here's what we do. So again, beginning of the tribulation all the way to the very end of the tribulation, we will talk about why. This is the one we'll talk about Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. So we have the pre-tribulation rapture of the bride. If you've been around listening to me, this is what we talked about over and over and over. Okay, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go. The Ezekiel 38 and 39 war is a pre-tribulational thing. It happens before the tribulation occurs. And there's a lot of great reasons for it. And you can understand those two actually on the first two episodes of Hope in the Last Days series. How do you get to that? YouTube channel, you're already on there. Secondly, you go to the Hope in the Last Days playlist, then you pop into those two. So then you'll find that. Okay? Now, obviously, it starts with the first seal, which is the Antichrist. Has to start there. I've had a number of people yesterday who said we're in the fifth seal or we are in the second seal. Someone said something like the second seal in June. And I'm like going, okay, you want to say that, I'm going to ask you this one question. When, especially when you do the fifth seal, but the second seal, if the second seal happens in June, and see, I didn't make the determination. So I'm not going to have to prove that. I don't have to prove your theorem. Does that make sense? If I say the Dallas Cowboys suck, if they're 3 and in the 17 game series, that they do in the NFL nowadays, if they're 3-14, duh, they do suck, right? But if I said the Dallas Cowboys in 2023, they went 12-5. Now, I'm not even a Dallas fan, so don't take me on this one. But if they're 12-5 and I said they suck, I don't have any empirical evidence to indicate that, because even the casual fan can look at it and go, well, they were 12-5. I probably am biased in that. So I better prove my point when there's other empirical evidence that tells me that's not even a correct statement. I'm going to do that with people. They get pissed at me, but I'm telling you, you got to prove it if you want to make something up that's going to happen in June of 2024 kind of thing. And sorry, you don't get to throw this in there, okay? Because you have to start with the Antichrist. It is what the Bible says. Now, in the first half of the tribulation, more toward the middle-ish section, and it goes from here to, throughout the time frame, but from here to this point on, there's absolute economic crisis or chaos. And people go, yeah, we're in that right now, so we're in the tribulation. Okay, but guess what? We were in that time frame under the Great Depression from 1929-ish all the way through basically 1941. So if we were in the Great Depression, and by the way, nowadays we are actually 30 times worse than the Great Depression. I can economically show that. But it doesn't mean we're in a tribulational point, because one point lines up, it doesn't mean everything lines up. But in that time frame, this will be a worldwide thing that makes the Great Depression look like a ride on your favorite merry-go-round kind of thing. In the second half of the tribulation, the mark is required. Mark of the beast will be required. Now, they might have it here, but do they necessarily require it? Now, again, I'm not telling you the date, right? Approximately, right? Next on the list, come on, click. We would have what I call hell on earth. Everything's flipped so bad when you look at the 7 trumpets and the 7 bowls, that I actually kind of go, man, you have no idea. You think we're even there yet? They are so bad that it's like putting hell on earth. And I'm not saying, I don't want to use it as a simile. A simile is like, I would say and I'm not even going to go metaphorically hell on earth, okay? Or metaphorically hell on earth. I would say almost literally hell on earth. It's going to flip things, and it's going to just add ideas that actually occur in hell. And you are going to be surprised when you realize some of that stuff. Okay. Bottom below here, or below, we always talked about this. The 7 seals go from the beginning to the very end of the tribulation. The trumpets, middle to end. The bowls go from later in the time frame to the very end. And that is revolutionary for most people. They get freaked out when I say that. And I'm going, there is a reason why. Because, and we will show you one of those reasons in this week and in the next episode with that too. Okay. The 144,000 young Jewish men who have never had sex with a woman. That's why I say people say to me all the time, well, America is the 144,000. Yeah, the Jehovah's Witnesses said they were 144,000. Once they got past, I want to tell you something funny. Taking off my dumb iWatch here. Once they got past 144,000 members in the Jehovah's Witnesses, they were like, well, all of these people will go on in a rapture-ish kind of event, but everyone else is not. And they're like, well, then why do you keep adding members in the Jehovah's Witnesses? Well, those people will at least they'll go through the tribulation, but they won't have to, but they'll live on in the millennial kingdom. And so they just kept changing the rules. Okay. And that's just not cool with me with that. Now, they bring in what I believe is a group called the Chosen. And we talk about that a lot more in the Hope in the Last Days series, but I have actually been called by God, I think, to talk. I'm going to pick all of these names, the remnant. I've already done the bride and child. There's going to be on I'm going to add that on a series point. But the remnant, the chosen, the called, the faithful, the 144,000. We're going to do each one of those ones, and we're going to pick them apart and show you biblically what they are, or more specifically, who they are. Okay. Now, these people actually have a purpose in existing up to the time frame. Sorry, my button pushed. They exist at a particular time frame, and their job is to witness the wedding of the Lamb, more specifically the wedding feast. Where is that found? In Matthew 22, 1 through 13. It's real interesting kind of stuff. They have a job, just like you have a job as the bride of Christ to be married to Jesus, because when he comes back at Rosh Hashanah in the clouds, we will explain that this week. You'll see more about that. Now, the second half of the tribulation has another group, and these are probably the biggest ones that are murdered. And there's going to be martyrs here. There's always been martyrs, but we're going to talk about a massive group of people. When you're in heaven, you're going to watch these people die for their witness. You are going to be cheering them on in every way, shape, and form, even though these were pretty hardened kind of people. When you see them, okay, I actually talk about that more in the Foretold series, and I also talk about that in another book that I have. And so, anyway, this is a long story when we get into that. So, but they come to Christ mostly because there's actually an angel of the Lord, one, who bounces around all over the earth. It's real interesting how it kind of explains it. And the two witnesses. And I talked about those a couple weeks ago. So they bring in their seed, or their progeny, in essence, is the called. Now, the two witnesses have a death point in the last few days of the tribulation and their death, but the called actually accomplish their job late in the tribulation. And this is how we actually can put together three theories of the rapture. So fascinating, most people don't think about it. They want to argue about it, but you know what? God actually puts it in the Word. And we'll kind of give you a little bit more information about that. Okay. We did this one last week, so I'm going to do this one really quick. The pre-tribulation rapture of the bride, the Ezekiel 38 and 39 war. We always have the Antichrist. The next one is the false prophet. I'm just reminding you guys, okay? He brings on the image of the beast, okay? The image of which beast? Well, this is the second beast. This is the first beast. The false prophet, the second dude, has to give the image for worship of the first guy. That worship, he's setting it up somewhere in that time frame, somewhere in the middle to later time frame. But he has to set it up so that when the mark of the beast is required, that worship thing happen of the image of the beast. Fascinating kind of stuff. Okay. And that late in that time frame, we have the second seal, which is what I would call World War III. Some people argue with me, well, it could be World War IV. Okay. I'm just picking a number. You don't like that number. You want to see World War IV. That's fine with me. You're not killing me there. The third seal, famine and hyperinflation. These are actually tied on with World War III. Because guess what happens after you get a world war of 1.875 billion potential of a quarter of the planet dying? Well, guess what? You'll have hyperinflation and you'll have famine. But then it will follow itself right up with the pale horse, which is another quarter, which is talking about a quarter of the planet. I believe that we're seeing a quarter of the planet dying in this basic time frame. So this is all kind of a tetrad, so it's kind of pushing it in there. The fifth seal are the martyrs, and they actually are the people of the called. So that actually is in the second half of the tribulation. Again, I can't tell you the time frame. I'm just putting it in basic order with that too. Now, the 144,000, we talked about them. There will be a severe deception upon the people in this time frame. And so that's what's going on before that time frame, and then it just gets worse, right? Satan does need to be God because the Antichrist will die and he moves on to his death point and Satan comes down. That's Revelation 12:12, 12:11 and 12. And it says, "Woe to you, earth, for the devil has come down with great wrath, knowing that his time is short." The trumpets start almost at the same time at this fascinating part as the seals. So guess what? They're sitting on top of each other. The first one is hail and fire. So you got a third of all the plant life and all the grass dying. The second one is a comet with volcanic eruptions with that too. How many people die from that one? I have no idea. It's just a fascinating point. That would more likely mean the comet might hit on the in the ground, on one of the continents, kind of thing. Okay. The third trumpet would be a meteor, so it's a slightly different thing, and a third of the water goes bitter. Now it's not blood, but bitterness for that. What happens with that? Hard to say. Okay, and I don't spend time because God doesn't tell us the hows. He just says it's bitter. So guess what? Stop trying to figure some of that too much out. Okay, focus on that a third of the waters. Now this would probably affect 100 million people, but it's nearly at the same time frame we have this stuff. So could they be sitting on top of each other? This one is doing a portion of the planet, and this is killing off other people. And do some of the plague issues happen because of this? Maybe. We're going to be surprised about some of those issues. Okay. Lastly, we have the fourth trumpet in here, or part of this little grouping here. Then a third of the planet is darkened. Well, why would that happen? Because you got a meteor and a comet just is knocked down onto the planet. But when you have that circumstance, this one here, the third, goes to the fifth trumpet. And there is a fifth trumpet, and out of the waters, out of the abyss of this, you're going to see, coming from Wormwood, you're going to see these really ugly creatures who actually sting the people. They want to die for 5 months, and they cannot die. I call it the zombie trumpet. Go back to the last one, and you hear more about that. Then we get to the sixth trumpet, and boom, it's almost hard for me to build this because it's like, well, where do they, it's almost not enough room to do this. And you're going, it's hard to kind of keep up with. It's all packed in there. Yeah, baby. You know why it's packed in there? I'm going to give you one basic reason why it's packed in there. Matthew 24 gives us a clue. It says that just as a woman who is in labor pains, she notices it gets worse, and it talks about the labor pains kind of issue. Now that is it's an interesting reference. It's talking about Jesus is kind of referring to Israel because his audience directly in Matthew 24. When some people talk about pre-tribulation rapture of the bride, they only talk about Matthew 24. No one I know of who talks about the pre-tribulation rapture of the bride or the even uses Matthew 24 to prove that point. Matthew 24 is talking to the Jews. Now, we can get some instructive points in there, but that's talking about the Jews. But it gives you a pregnancy issue. Now, we know that in Revelation 12, it talks about the history of Satan. And that history of Satan goes back through time and talks about the Jewish woman, or this woman, which is Mary, Mother Mary. She bears Jesus, and so it's giving that kind of reference. But it also is the one of those major turning points of the Jews. They bring about Jesus with that too. Okay. All right, so let's talk about the first two bowls. Now, where would you find those? Those happen to show up. We're gonna go. I'm moving to my iPad here. And okay, so Revelation 15, we have the preparation of the bowls. Okay, real interesting to read through the preparation points. Okay, and then we don't really see, and there's a lot of preparation. They come out of the sanctuary, and we'll talk about that in a second. And then we get to Revelation 16, verse 1, to have the first bowl. The first bowl shows up, and it shows up, and it has the wrath upon the people who have the mark. But before we do that, let's talk about why would you even have the bowls? Well, Revelation 15 gives you an understanding that they're closing up heaven. Satan's already been kicked out. He has been accusing you throughout eternity for the crimes you didn't do, like crimes against humanity, right? He's been accusing you, but Jesus' blood, representation over here, Jesus' blood has covered you. What happens is that the saints have been, the saints ask a question. It's more of what I believe the called, or the martyrs ask a question in Revelation 7, verse 10, 11, 12, and they say, when are we going to be exonerated? When are we going to be avenged, right? And so they ask this question, and they're going, when the number of you have reached basically what he says, the critical mass, or he would say when it's full. Well, guess what happens in here, Revelation 15? The bowls are full of the wrath. It's the people of the planet, which is Satan, creating this killing of these saints. And the bowls are coming from this. So you have those bowls. Let me back up one step here. Oops. The bowls come because the sanctuary has to be closed, and we have to have this thing coming over. So what happens with the bowls is they wipe out things. I mean, it's a complete wipeout issue. Okay, so the first bowl is the sores on those who took the mark. That would be Revelation 16. And so we see that Revelation 16, verse 1 and 2, they have painful sores, those who took the mark of the beast. It is a permanent decision. People think the mark, you can accidentally get the mark of the beast. Bah, no way. You can't get the mark of the beast just accidentally. There's a permanence to that decision. And even Satan has to file within the real point. Now, today you hear something different. People say, and by the way, that's what they want. Don't get me wrong. Satanists, Kabbalists tell you what they really want, but that's not what the Bible says. So that's what's confusing to a lot of Christians. They're hearing what the world says about the mark of the beast, and yet that isn't biblically correct. Correct? I mean, does it make sense? If it's not biblically correct, it doesn't mean that they're right. Yes, that is their goal, but that doesn't mean that's what the Bible says. And so you have to understand what the word says, and that colors your viewpoint. But it's a permanent decision. Now, so that they have powerful swords. And I mean, this will be very difficult, and it will debilitate those who happen at that last time frame. We'll talk about the exact time frame here in a second. Now, the second bowl shows up in Revelation 16:3, where he pours it out upon the sea, which means all of the seas are all the oceans. So we're talking about saltwater kind of thing, and all the life dies. You would also understand that every ship who is in this. Now, by the way, you already know the third trumpet is blood showing up on a third of the seas. Well, now it just gets expanded to every sea. Shipping halts. This is why you have to put the bowls at the very end. One thing I have never really liked about the Left Behind series, I love the Left Behind series in a lot of other ways. One of the things that kind of gets wrong is that they put the bowls really soon into the second half of the tribulation. And they're only there for a little bit and then they're gone. And I'm like, the word doesn't say that. I mean, how do you get blood out? The answer is you don't. So we need to be pretty darn late in the tribulation for this to happen, because, by the way, when these things start happening, it's like that pregnancy event. So let me kind of go over that. Your first trimester, things don't change that much, right? Physically. The woman can go, still work out, but she kind of notices her stomach's bigger and a few other things. She might have, the throwing up events in the morning, right? The morning sickness kind of thing. Second half of her, or the second trimester, is significant changes. She notices those significant changes. And then when we get to the third trimester, I mean, like everything just goes exponentially, right? All the same stuff she felt in the first trimester, other than sickness, morning sickness, shows up still in the third trimester. The stuff in the second trimester goes to the third trimester. So then they add more stuff. To sometimes women have to like spend the last 6 weeks in bed because of issues of difficulty with the baby, right? Trauma, stress to the baby, who could potentially die. So they have to do some really crazy things. So it totally knocks that woman out in those last several months of pregnancy. I mean, and that's the time frame most women complain about it, right? But that's actually exactly what Matthew 24 tells us about. And it uses that analogy, that gorgeous level of analogy that every person on the planet can recognize, guys can, but we've all seen our wives or whatever go through this thing. But when women look at it, they go, of course. Well, like, duh, right? And so women actually get this more. But all the seas turn to blood. That means most of the people who die, they will die if they're even close to the coastlines. Everyone in Japan, let's pick Japan as an idea. I'll bet you nearly everyone dies in Japan, because they're so close to the coastline all the way around them. How about the Philippines? Gone. Other areas that you might show up, even Okinawa, for instance. I'm just thinking of places that are in those islands, and they're gone. You're going to see that they just can't survive at all, because their whole life is based upon what the ocean gives them, right? Again, no more shipping. Business is going to be halted worldwide. This is when you think about that first half of the tribulation, where there's economic crisis for the normal people, the rich, the ultra rich, are going to be severely affected here. This is when they kind of realize they're getting their comeuppance, as in essence. Okay. Now, the timing of these bowls, we talk about this. This is probably the month of Elul. Elul is a time frame of beginning of forgiveness. This is when they're looking to get right with God. But it's a little bit before Rosh Hashanah, and we'll talk about Rosh Hashanah in a second. But it's a softening up of the planet. So these are probably the most incorrigible that are going to die in this time frame. When they die, They probably, I mean, if they, especially if they have the mark, or if you die without Christ, you're going to hell. It is what it is. Okay? All right, let's move on. Let's talk about some Jewish holidays of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. I had a guy, I was teaching my Hope in the Last Day series, not as fresh as the one that I have that you can kind of see. It was when I was just drawing up on the board. And this one guy, wonderful, wonderful man, right? This is in this Methodist church that I was teaching it in. Super, super good guy. And he would have his charts and he would have his booklet. This guy knew his stuff. And after I left that church, he actually took over a lot of the teaching of some things. I have no idea how much he taught of stuff. But what he would do, he walked in one time and we were like 2 weeks away from Rosh Hashanah. This was in 2017. And he was like, well, Jesus is coming back for his bride on Rosh Hashanah in 2 weeks. And I'm like, I guarantee you we will still be here. What? And he was like crestfallen. And of course, 3 weeks later, I said, oh, you're here. I was joking with him a little bit. But you have to understand, Rosh Hashanah is strictly, inextricably tied to Yom Kippur. Let's go through that. It's late in September, the first day of Tishri. Okay? So this is in that late September timeframe. That's why we also know that Jesus was born upon this date. It is also a very interesting point. So that's, when was he born? 911-3 BC, Rosh Hashanah. And we'll talk about why here. But it's also an anniversary of Adam and Eve coming on the planet. It's an anniversary of creation. So it's a beginning point in essence. Wild, wild, wild. That could go for a long time if we wanted to. In this celebration time frame, they raise a great noise. And we'll talk about that great noise here in a second because it's real kind of cool. But that's the celebration that they do. This is what I would talk about. There is an interesting tetrad of people. When you look at Rosh Hashanah, there's actually 3 points that they will kind of do. They will think about 3 groups: the righteous, the wicked, and the intermediate. Now, a Jewish person knows that he is not righteous in and of himself because he has to use the atoning blood of the lamb or the goat or the lamb or the calf or the bird that he brings in to cover his sin. Okay? Only in the New Testament do we understand that Jesus was the atoning lamb that covers the sin of the world. Okay? And the Jewish person doesn't agree with this viewpoint. But they're coming from that kind of point. So they would never call themselves righteous because they know they're not righteous. And the Bible says it over and over again. No one's righteous. No, not even one. And Paul in Romans 7:20, I want to say 25, but I could be wrong, 15, but it basically says, what a wretched man am I? Who is going to rescue me from this wicked man I am? And it's like such an odd construction of a sentence, but basically he's going, I suck. Inside of my flesh, nothing is good. Inside of the spirit, it is all good. It's real fascinating when you get there. So they think of themselves as the intermediate, the Jewish people. Now, wicked people would never go into the next time frame. Those are the people that don't go to the Rosh Hashanah service, right? They're wicked people and they're out of the camp of the Jewish people. But the righteous are in great shape. It's real fascinating with that too. We'll talk more about that. But it's also the coronation of the king. Now, I started learning about this when I started to update the teaching. This is probably, I don't know, 10 years ago, whatever it was. And I started updating the teaching because I'm learning stuff all the time too. And when I updated the teaching, I realized, wait a second, this is a coronation of the king. Pause for a second. close your eyes for just a second. I want you to do me a favor. Close your eyes. I want you to reach into historical time frames of, you know, the any time frame you could do. If you like French history, or you like English history, okay, or any other history, what happens is you have a king who is the leader of the nation, right, or the territory. So we'll just use, for instance, the King of England, right? So the King of England, how does he become? Well, he becomes from his birth and everything else, and his title and nobility and on and on. But one of the keys about him is that he's married. Now, we'll talk about that in half a second. But now I want you to focus on his son. So he always his job, and the queen's job, is to bring on a son to keep on this and go forward. So, but that son is still called a prince. Now, that prince is not completed to his coronation event until he does one thing: get married. If he's unmarried, he is unqualified to be a king. Just how it works. And so that's why there's something real fascinating about that viewpoint. There are actually really interesting researchers right now that look back on King Henry VIII with all the 7 divorces that he did, and he would just kill off his wife, right? And there was potentially, because of that event, we have Elizabeth, we have Mary, then Bloody Mary, and then you have Elizabeth, who has a very peaceful reign, but was never married. And some people perceive that at that time frame there was an actual changeover, but this is potentially where the cabal, or the ugly people, started to show up and exert their real abilities in that time frame, and they derivated from the real kingness of that place. And it's because of King Henry VIII. It's just a potential point that's happening out there. You can do your research. You don't have to agree with me on that. I'm just saying that's a potential of what some people say. Not against a queen. I don't care either way. But the queen in traditional point is completed by the king. Okay, so the king is that one. He has to be married. Jesus is not married. This is why one of the biggest heresies of people who want to disbelieve the Bible is they want to say that Jesus had children. He got married to Mary Magdalene, and we have all kinds of books that do the silliness, right? And he really got married to Mary Magdalene, and he had kids, and we see the progeny of Jesus. And I go, no, that's not what Scripture says. That he was unmarried. And Paul even takes us further, and he talks about this in his books, and he says, hey, listen, man, if you need to get married because you can't control yourself, can't keep your pants zipped up, in essence, get married. But I'd really prefer if you could keep your ministry whole by not being married, because there's other issues that come out because of that. So he's talking about something else. He's doing it off of the tradition of Jesus. When you understand what Paul's talking about, just the tradition of Jesus, and set up something, it doesn't mean that people have to do this, but he was talking about why he kind of went that direction. Because what Jesus was doing is the king. Now, Jesus is the Prince of Peace, but he's also the King of Kings. Now, he has existed in that point in time. Let me share something interesting with you. Jesus is born on 9/11/3 BC, on Rosh Hashanah. Powerful date. As an anniversary of Adam and Eve, and we have the called date of Day of Judgment. This is also another point of Day of Judgment, but it's also called the Feast of Trumpets. Now that's why people get kind of confused about this, and they think it's a point of at the last trumpet. That's 1 Corinthians 15:56. Gets into that conversation, which is another conversation of the rapture event, but one of the rapture events. Now, the coronation of the king. Jesus is born, but he existed from the foundation of the earth. But it says that he died. He was the sacrificial lamb of God from the foundation. But he has to come to the earth in April 3rd, 33 AD to have the actual earthly event of his death. You see, if you don't understand the first coming of Christ, you don't get the second coming. That's when I talk to people all the time and they think they're second coming experts. And I'm going, if you don't understand first coming and why the first coming happens, you won't get the second coming. So you need to go backward in that point, right? The coronation of the king transfers ownership or kingship or control of his territory. See, that prince doesn't become the king until the king abdicates his throne to his son, but that son has to be married. And that's what the bride of Christ fulfills. Because when we see him in the clouds, and I'll talk about this, he actually has a crown on his head. Now, one of the interesting parts is that there's a shofar blast. That's a horn type of thing that is a blasting events of the high priests and some of the other priests with him. And there's a whole conversation about that. But to give you the point, they do 100 shofar blast. That means a complete blessing. It means that the blessing is full. That's why they do that. When we have this is the fulfillment of Rosh Hashanah. This is one of the primary reasons it has to be at the end of the tribulation. It cannot be at the beginning, because when we move to Yom Kippur, it means the holiest day of the year. It's a day of fasting and prayer. It's a more somber time frame than any of the other dates. You must be right with the community before the next year's crop or your business circumstance. So guess what you do during this 10 days? Real interesting points of 10 days. There's 10 days where you better go. Scott's got to make a list. Okay, I went to Joe and Mary and Jimmy and John and all these other people and go, you know what? I lied to you about XYZ. Would you please forgive me? This is what they would do. The intermediate does in this time frame. This is what the Jews believe. Powerful point. And it's not. It doesn't matter whether that person does, but he better come with a contrite heart, right, to ask for forgiveness. That's that person's job to forgive or not. But his job is to go, like Scott would be, I got to make my list, and I'm going to go through my list, because I need to be right by the end of this 10 days, or you're not in good shape for the next year. Oh my gosh, it's such a cool thing. I teach a lot more about this in the Hope in the Last Day series when we go to that point as well. Now, this is also called a Day of Atonement. Now, atonement means when you have an atonement event, it normally is like the stone that would touch the lips. This is also talked about in Scripture. When you touch the stone of atonement stone, it is a purification. And it like completely destroys sin. When purification comes, it is perfectly pure. That's why the Ark of the Covenant cannot be touched, because it's pure. You are not pure. Anything impure dies. That's why it's such a powerful point. We think of atonement as a fun thing. It's not exactly in a fun way. It's a purification of that. Yom Kippur is also referred to as the coming of the king. So wait a second, we have the coronation of the king, and here's the coming. Because what happens here is he's coronated on an event. Just think about our prince for a second, and his dad abdicates the throne to the son. when he's married and he's qualified to do the job, right? So he's come of age and he's raised up and done the job. This is kingly prince traditions. Then he has to be married. Once he does that, there is an interim time frame between this time frame, and then they have a situation of a coronation, which is a physical event of they put the crown on your head, to now there's the coming of the king. That's when he comes on the throne. So there's two separate events. This is also called the new year. This would be like, January 1 kind of idea from Yom Kippur. So that happens in early October-ish time frame. Okay. Now, it also is known, Yom Kippur is actually known as the long day. Now, I want you to kind of flip with me for a sec and give you an idea, because we got Zechariah. So that's going to be late in your New Testament, or Old Testament, excuse me, sorry. One of the second to last books. You got to go to 14, the very last one, and you hit verse 6 and 7. Now, we know that, I believe it's Jacob. I'm blank. No, not Jacob. Joshua, sorry. Joshua has a long day. When he kept his arms up, he was winning the battle. As soon as he kept his arms down, he was losing. The Jews were losing the battle. So someone held his arms up. He's like, right? Okay. But Zechariah actually talks about another event. He says, on that day, the reference of that day is the last day, the great day of the wrath of the Lamb. There will be no light, no sunlight, no moon, and the moon will diminish. Oh, by the way, the fourth trumpet has occurred, and there's a darkening of the thing. So we have a diminishment, a darkening event. Well, that's the fourth trumpet. And it will be a day known only to Yahweh. Wait, that's only the king, the father knows the date. But there will be light at the evening. So without day or night. So guess what basically it's saying there? There's an extension of that day. That's another way of saying extension of the day. Cool stuff. Okay. There's a confusion that keeps coming, and people who don't know end time issues struggle with this. There are 3 points that happen out there. So the first one is called the secret coming, and they get really upset about it. You think of the rapture is not even in the Bible. I hear this all the time. Rapture's not in the Bible. Rapture's Latin. The Greek word is harpazo. They're the same thing. It means to be caught away. Some bad truther information tells you that the rapture is a bad event. It's taking away the bad people. That's not what Scripture says over and over and over again. When you look at the rapture scriptures, all the rapture scriptures, whether you are looking at it from a post-trib or pre-trib, it's a good event. It's taking the good people out. That's what it said. I don't care what anyone else wants to say. Again, we form our information from what the word says. This would be fulfilled at the rapture of the bride, or the fulfilling of the wedding feast. Well, this is the secret coming. This is in 1 Thessalonians 4:16 through 18. So we have this real interesting secret event. It's not the beginning of the tribulation. It's before the tribulation starts. Now, when these people get confused about these things, like they don't understand, but it's really about the who here. The second kind of event is that when Jesus is seen in the clouds. It's not the same thing as here, because here's what happens. Jesus is shown in the clouds in Revelation 14:14, Revelation 14:16. It says, the Son of Man came, he was in the clouds, has a sickle in his hand, so that he is winnowing out his people, which are called the grapes. Okay, so real interesting conversation, because when you go to Revelation 14, 15, 14, 17, 18, and 19, we talk about the grapes of wrath, the stomping out of the bad ones. Who does that? The angels. But Jesus in Revelation 14, 14, Revelation 14, 16 is in the clouds. He's taking away the grapes, the fruit. The ones that he doesn't want, the ones that are part of the wicked versus the righteous, he's separating those two. Oh my gosh, that's Rosh Hashanah. This doesn't happen at Rosh Hashanah because doesn't fulfill that. But this date does fulfill it. That coronation of the king, declaring to the world. He steps out into the planet. Everyone sees him. This is where it also says, and we misunderstand this, and we'll talk a little bit more about this, but it says that every tongue will confess that Jesus is Lord. Now, some people look at that and it's like, that's a great one. Well, because everyone's going to come to salvation. Well, that didn't say everyone comes to salvation. Romans 10, 9, and 10 says you have to declare that Jesus is Lord and Savior. They don't say it. When everyone sees him in the planet, even the people with the mark of the beast, they're going to go, uh-oh, Jesus is really Lord. That dude who is in Babylon, which I think is the real Babylon in Iraq, in that wicked city that goes on a long time about this one. That's in Revelation 17 or 18, blanking it out in my head. But basically in that time frame, it talks all about the death of that city in a 1 hour time frame. Fascinating point. That those people, even though they have the mark of the beast and he's calling himself God, well, that's really Satan. Jesus shows up in the shows up in the clouds and freaks everyone out. And by the way, we have a darkening before Jesus shows up in the clouds and lights the planet all at once. That's Rosh Hashanah. It's a different event. The last event that people get confused of is when he steps upon the planet. When he's stepping on the planet, he's already taken back his people. He comes back in Revelation 17, 14 and Revelation 19, and he comes back in Revelation 17, 14. Jesus is on his white horse. He comes back with his called, chosen, and faithful. Those are three separate groups of people. And we talk about that a little bit more in other ones. And again, I'm going to be talking about those in other episodes in the future. But Jesus steps on the planet, but he doesn't step on the planet here. So that's why people get all confused and they get all silliness over here and they go, you just don't know what you're talking about. Those are all the same event. No, they're not. No, not. This is First Thessalonians 4:16, and there's other ones. And then this one is Revelation 14:14, and then this is Revelation 14:17, and Revelation 19. Three separate events, okay? But it's all about who's with him, okay? All right, Rosh Hashanah, let's do this a little bit more. It's the rapture of the bride. The rapture of the bride cannot happen in that glorious appearing. Rosh Hashanah must come with Yom Kippur. So you cannot have Rosh Hashanah fulfilled in the beginning of the tribulation, where some people want to put the rapture, because you have to fulfill the end of the 10 days. It's tied to those 10 days, those holiness of days, the holy of days. You have to fulfill it. And you have to understand you're fulfilling this tied together, linked events of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. We talked about those. It is 100 shofar blasts. I already talked about it. It completes the blessing. It is the last. This is going to be real interesting. It's the last rapture. This would also be the pre-wrath rapture concept, which is not the church or the bride. Powerful point. I talk about that other ones, but this one's a powerful, powerful point that you don't always understand if you don't look at it. But it's a completed blessing. Revelation 1:3 says, if you'll study, pay attention, and keep the words in your heart, you will have a blessing. What's that blessing? The rapture. Okay. Now, Rosh Hashanah it says in one of the celebration points in Jewish tradition is to make a great noise. Well, guess what? Revelation 10 tells you about 7 thunders that speaks. Now, John's in heaven. Again, every time we are in heaven, John is breaking the timeline when he's talking about what's happening on earth, but he's talking about this from heaven, his perspective sitting in heaven. And there's an angel right there with him. And he hears what the 7 thunders say in Revelation 10. And he's about to write it down. And the angel goes, no, don't write that down. Seal that up for the end. Why would he do that? Well, maybe he's talking about something very specific at Rosh Hashanah. That would be Rosh Hashanah that happens. Let me back up here so you don't get too focused on that. What do the 7 thunders say? They could be actually saying the name of the Antichrist. They could be talking about the exact date. I mean, and we actually see this mirroring event that happens in Daniel 12:12. When we see Daniel 12, Daniel 11, but it talks about, he says, he's writing it down. He goes, I'm about ready to write something down, but it's supposed to be sealed up for the end times. Then he says that knowledge will increase dramatically. But he says, wait, that piece of writing, prophetic writing, is not supposed to be known until the end of the time frame. Now, it's possible that Daniel is referring to what we're dealing with right here, but it's more possible that it's in the tribulation that it gets really revealed. Revelation 10 is talking about the 7 thunders. So this is Jesus speaking with a loud, gigantic voice. Do you see this little picture here? My favorite pictures. This is Jesus in the clouds speaking with it's only 1 thunder, but you get the idea. The 7 thunders. An incredibly loud voice that no one won't be able to hear. And possibly, here's what some of the things are saying. Not just some of the stuff you just heard. Some of the stuff is there's a salvation event. Now, there's 2 different salvation that has to occur. We have to have the sheep. These are the nations who live in the millennial reign. And you read this in Ezekiel and Isaiah and several other points. Zechariah talks a little bit about this too, and they talk about the millennial reign. That if these people don't come up for the feasts, this is a different type of feast points. We talk about in the millennial reign type time frames. But if you don't come up for the feasts, you won't get rain on your land in Egypt. Essentially, these are non-Jewish people. Now, the New Testament talks about the sheep all the time. Again, we'll talk about it some other time, some other point. The remnant is the last third of the people. So the Jews are going to be attacked. And this is in Revelation 12. He's so mad, the Antichrist is so mad because he has Satan in him. What are you worth? The devil's come down with great wrath, knowing that his time is short. He is referring to, I'm taking off and I'm going after the Jews. And that's when they go off to Petra and that remnant is saved, but it's only a third of them. What happens to the other 2/3? He's killing them off. They're part of that killing point. So that's one of the things that I believe there's a salvation of these, and they come all in salvation. That happens in Zechariah too, where we have a salvation event that occurs. Oh, by the way, I was talking about that. It was in Zechariah 14. Okay. Well, anyway, the point is that the remnant come, and they come all at once. And we've known that through, and it comes in Malachi, it comes in Zechariah, and they come all at once. But I believe these people everyone on the planet is going to do this. And I think that's one of the very last moments in time for people to come to salvation. Well, they can't have the mark of the beast. But they have to be really hardened people. And this is actually one of the theorems that we brought up in the foretold book 1 and 2. Okay? The wicked are condemned at this point. This is where we have Revelation 14, 17, 18, and 19, right? That's when we have the grapes of wrath. Well, that would be more of Armageddon of that kind of conversation. So there's the wine press of the wrath of the Lamb, where the blood comes up to the horse's saddle. This is more of an Armageddon conversation. So it's talking about the wicked are condemned at that moment in time. They're the ones that kneel and they say Jesus is Lord, but they don't say that he's the Savior. They don't say that. Uh, uh, Second Chronicles 7:14 says, and if we humble ourselves, pray, seek his face, look up and seek his face. Look up and seek his face. He will heal the people and he will heal their land. Land means the earth. That is a fulfillment of that first one of the sheep and the remnant. When the remnant of the Israel Jews, the remnant, when they come to salvation, it is a signal for the millennial reign. The earth gets cleaned and fulfilled into the millennial reign because the remnant come to Jesus. Boy, it's powerful. Wicked, this is the last time, buddy. You suck. You're done. Okay. Fulfillment of this day, like I said, Second Chronicles 7:14, Philippians 2:11. That's the one where all flesh will stand there, claim Jesus as Lord. Romans 14 and 11. And then lastly, so not all the earth is saved. We just mentioned this again. They bow to the king, but not in salvation. So that's Romans 10:9 and 10, John 10:10, Acts 4:12. There's no other name under heaven by which we may be saved, which is Acts 4:12. So you have to have those events for a real salvation experience. But everyone in the world in this point in time frame is claiming that Jesus is least Lord. Oh, it's going to tick off Satan with this too. But it's going, you have got nothing left. Okay, let's talk about those last few weeks. So I believe that I can't really do this perfect on this thing. And by the way, Jeff Swanson and I disagree a little bit on the exact timing, but remember, they're within a few weeks. If we're getting this wrong on the exact moment in time, we're close. Okay, don't get all sideways on those kinds of things. But I think the bowls happen a little bit in the month of Elul. They're beginning a point there. We have the second bowl where all the seas turn to blood. I believe, and the seven thunders are talking at Rosh Hashanah. Okay, so we have that event that happens. Let me grab something to drink. And then we have the rivers turn to blood. Now, the third bowl is every river turns to blood. Well, the reason why I kind of throw this here, where most people might throw it out a little bit later, is realize if every river goes to blood, how long does it take before every person in the earth dies? Well, the average is 3 to 5 days that you can survive without water. And you're going, this is actually a powerful point. Everyone would actually die in 3 to 5 days. And every other time frame until around whatever 60s or whenever the first bottled water came out. I don't know the date, but you get the idea. When we could bottle water and hold it for that thing, this is why Revelation could only be fulfilled in our day and age. Because any other time frame, 1880s, and by the way, through the 1800s, tons of preachers were saying we're in the end times. It couldn't have happened because they couldn't have bottled the water up enough, because they got their water from the springs very quickly and drank it. And they got their water from springs and drank it. Got their water from the spring and utilized it for potted water or whatever they were doing with it. But if the rivers all turn to blood, there's no drinking. So I mean, I still put it in the beginning time frame of that 10 days. But again, where you might set it there, that's, it's hard to say. There's an interesting part. We don't just have the rivers turning to blood, which means that you've got to have enough water to do this. So those with bottled water, right? But now the sun is scorching. So I used Chat GPT, and some people get mad about that, but just listen to me for a second. What the word scorching means. Okay, that's what it says in the Greek there. But when you say scorching, it means like mercury mercury level scorching, or Venus. We're talking about so much that it would just burn it all up. Well, the planet's not going to like have that much, but we might have a hole in the atmospheric layers that would bring in the UV points and burn. So maybe 140, 150, 160 degrees. I mean, I don't know what that number is. But again, it's going to be even more difficult to live in this time frame. So people are dying dramatically here. Now, if you, and it actually says throughout, and I don't have the verse in my, I have the verse basically in my head, but I don't have the reference. It says, "Blessed are those who actually come to the Lord, but they die in this time frame because they're going to be in heaven." So these are people that will go to heaven if they die, if they've already had salvation events here. Then it talks about the fifth, the kingdom of darkness. We will get into that later. That would be Babylon going into darkness. The sixth bowl is real interesting. It's three parts. The Euphrates River dries up. That would be in Iran-ish, Turkey-ish area kind of thing. It's because the kings of the east are coming over with their 200 million man army. They come over, and here's the interesting part. It talks about also the three frogs are coming out of the Antichrist, Satan, and the false prophet. So again, that has never happened. So we're not in the tribulation. When people say, well, all this stuff has already happened. Well, when are three frogs coming out of three people? Okay. And the kings of Armageddon are gathered. There's several statements of gathering when we get into the bowls, and means that they're brought together. Okay. And so somewhere in this point in time, again, in that last 10 days, I think that occurs. The two witnesses will live for 1,260 days, and then they're killed. We talked about this a little bit. The second woe is in this same time frame. The first woe is the fifth trumpet, where we have, the zombie trumpet, where people can't die. They're stung, but they can't die for five months, and they want to die. It's called the first woe. This is the second of the woes. It's the 10th. A tenth of Jerusalem dies in the earthquake. So maybe 7,000, or says 7,000 people die. So right during this is kind of a judgment of the Jews, of the people. Satan and the Jews in that time frame are killing off the people, or the people who are living in that point in time, that they're not believers. And then we have the two witnesses will rise up from the dead in 3.5 days. And then they go up into another type of resurrection, a rapture resurrection kind of event. At the same basic time frame, there's the seventh seal. One of the coolest things in Revelation 8, verse 1. And it says that there is a silence in heaven for 30 minutes. And it's a real interesting statement of time. It just means when you have that, Jesus is coming in the clouds here. When there's a silence in heaven, it's a conversation about the angels go, shut up. And normally when you have that, you're waiting for a royal proclamation, a royal thing to occur. God's about to do something, but we don't get to do anything. So there's a complete silence. And I mean, there's probably even a stillness in heaven that happens. And then we have at this last point, and we will get into this one next, the seventh bowl, which is the sixth seal, the seventh trumpet, the seventh bowl. Also the third woe is this massive earthquake. And we will talk about that on the next time frame. And then we have the great day of the wrath of the Lamb. This is all in that same time frame. Those things are occurring there. Okay, so we talked about this one. I know we went a little bit longer. We talked about those areas there that you need to see. These are the last weeks upon the planet. Again, we don't have the exact dates, and it's funny because Dr. Jeff Swanson and I talk about this, and we get into little debates about this stuff, and we love to get in debates. We can be okay with each other. We'll debate each other on this issue, and we have debated even recently, and it's okay. because if he's more right and it's over here, it's there, we're talking about on these last bulls, they're all within about a 30-day period of time. So one could shift this way or that way. And so we're trying to give you some basic understanding of that point too. Let me pull this off here. Sorry. So let me get off of here of the screen. So as we end up here, again, we will talk about the last few days of the planet, but I do want you to kind of remember, if you want to know more about this kind of stuff, the wedding of Jesus gets into the goats, a little bit of the sheep, more specifically, and the bride of Christ. So these are really powerful kind of events. And again, you also have the rapture. Could there be more than one? It talks more about what we just kind of went over a little bit, but I go in a lot more detail that we're really not doing in this particular series. Thanks, guys. I really appreciate it. You can always go to drscottyoung.com. Hey, remember one thing I keep telling, I have people that think that I'm scamming you, that I'm asking you to buy like QFS online. I've never sold any of that stuff. There's a guy that's all mad at me because he thinks he's talking to me, and I'm going, you know what happens to most of those people? It's a guy, Dr. Scott has got an Indian accent. That isn't me. Okay, I don't sell anything. Do not buy anything of QFS or any of those kinds of things. There are lots of people who are out there scamming. Don't be one of them. Okay, don't buy anything. I'll only tell you about a book that's $10. Okay, you want to buy the book, go. If you don't want to buy the book, that's fine. But there's all kinds of other information on the website at drscottyoung.com. Thanks so much.